The Revolutionary War at New Bridge Landing, a chapter in our history told by Mary Bustillo Donohue and illustrated by George R. Fernández. New Bridge Landing, where the longest existing democracy in the world had its beginnings. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. A reading from The American Crisis by Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776. Because of its strategic location, General Washington made the Ackerman-Zabriskie home his headquarters and information-gathering outpost. Many famous figures in our history have been at Newbridge: George Washington, Thomas Paine, Baron von Steuben, the Marquis de Lafayette, and Generals Wayne, Greene, and Poor. It was at the Steuben House that these officers met to plan the course of our War of Independence. The place we know today as the Steuben House was once the home of the Zabriskie-Ackerman family. Because the family lived and many of the neighbors were Tories or Loyalists and sympathized with the British, they abandoned their home at Newbridge and went to live in New York City. How painful it must have been for them to leave their well-appointed home, friends, memories, and prosperous farms. Kristen was born on the 4th of July. The whole family had waited impatiently for her coming. Her birthday on such an important national holiday was a special surprise. Besides, Kristen was the first grandchild of a big family. Everyone was happy that a baby was coming. So when Kristen arrived, everyone was pleased. The 4th of July is sometimes called Independence Day. The 4th of July is the birthday of our country and Kristen's birthday. One 4th of July, not too long ago, Kristen received a lively Schnauzer puppy as a surprise birthday present. "His name is Jake," said Kristen. This book is to rekindle the spirit of patriotism within you. It is our heritage to keep. New Bridge Landing, River Edge, New Jersey. In the town of River Edge, New Jersey, where Kristen's grandfather and grandmother live, the 4th of July means a big parade and family fun at Memorial Park. Kristen's mom and dad grew up in River Edge. Ever since she was a little girl, Kristen and her parents and all the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends visit grandmother and grandfather on the 4th of July. They all come to watch the 4th of July parade step off on Bogart Road at Cherry Hill. There are big grass bands, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and Veterans march. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts march. The sheriff, mounted on a beautiful horse, marches in the parade. The mayor and council march. Even Uncle Sam marches in the parade, tall and proud. And everyone who was born on the 4th of July is invited to be part of the parade. All the neighbors wave along the parade route. When night comes, there are fireworks. The 4th of July is fun for everyone in River Edge. Why is Newbridge Landing important to our country? Asked Kristen. One beautiful, sunny 4th of July, Grandfather said, "Today, after the parade, I am going to visit an important place in the history of our country. I am going to visit historic Newbridge Landing, right here in River Edge. Kristen, would you and Jake like to come with me? I would like to tell you an interesting story of how the Dutch came to the New World, to New Jersey, to Bergen County, and to Demorest Landing, the name of River Edge a long time ago. I would like to tell you why Newbridge Landing is historic." "Yes, I would like to know," Kristen said happily. Grandfather took her hand, Jake's red leash, and began this story. The Dutch came to New Amsterdam to begin a new life in a new country. Make believe that you are a Dutch child who recently made a long journey of many weeks across the Atlantic Ocean from Holland with your family. The journey by boat was long, difficult, and dangerous. The brave people who made this journey knew that they would never return to Holland. They did not come to the New World to explore or conquer new lands. They came because they were good businessmen, traders, and farmers. They were paid to come by the Dutch West Indian Trading Company of Holland. There were two Dutch trading companies. The East India Trading Company did business with the spice trade of that part of the world. The Dutch West India Company did business with the eastern coast of North and South America and Africa. Many of these Dutch pioneers became very wealthy. The Dutch came to New Amsterdam to begin a new life in a new country where they would be able to work, pray, and live in freedom. In 1609, an English mariner by the name of Henry Hudson was employed by the Dutch East India Trading Company of Holland to find a shorter way to the Spice Islands of the East. The owners of the company believed that there was a shorter route via a northwest passage that would shorten the distance to the rich islands. The finding of this new route would make the Dutch East India Company very wealthy. Dutch businessmen were willing to pay Henry Hudson, a very capable seaman, a fine salary to find this route. Henry Hudson made 5 voyages to the New World seeking this shorter route, but was unsuccessful. Instead, he discovered and explored a beautiful river, and far to the north in Canada, the bay where the river's head waters began. The great river and bay today have his name. We know them as the Hudson River and the Hudson Bay. He declared he would never take down the Dutch flag. Peter Minuit, one of the early Dutch leaders, bought the land that we know today as Manhattan from the Native American leaders who were living there. There is a legend that he paid them 60 Dutch guilders for the land. The Native American leaders did not understand the value of European money. Today, that would be about $24. The Dutch named the new places where they would live Harlem, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and the Bowery to remind them of the homes they had left across the sea. Then in 1664, the British, claiming that Henry Hudson, an Englishman, had discovered these lands, came and without a battle or a war took over the Dutch settlements in the name of England and changed the name from New Amsterdam to New York. This is how New Amsterdam became New York almost 350 years ago. Peter Stuyvesant, a Dutch military officer, became governor of Curaçao in the West Indies. He lost a leg in a battle with the Portuguese on the island of St. Martin and returned to Holland. He was named governor of New Amsterdam in 1646. He proved to be a strong but not always a popular leader. In 1664, King Charles II of England gave his brother, the Duke of York, a large piece of land in North America that included the Dutch lands of New Netherlands. 4 menacing British warships, commanded by Captain Richard Nichols, arrived in what is now New York Harbor to claim these lands. He sent a messenger to Governor Peter Stuyvesant outlining the terms of the surrender. Governor Stuyvesant was so outraged by the English demands that he tore the letter to pieces. However, the burgomasters, members of the Dutch council, put the pieces of the letter together to read the British demands. They begged Governor Stuyvesant not to go to war needlessly. Governor Stuyvesant listened to the wishes of the people. In return for the orderly transfer of power of New Amsterdam to the new authority of King Charles II, the British promised rights of property ownership, history, and freedom of worship, and prohibited the housing of British soldiers in civilian homes. Almost 100 years later, some of these provisions became part of the Bill of Rights of the American Constitution. Governor Richard Nichols was proclaimed the first British governor on September 9, 1664, and New Amsterdam became New York. Peter Stuyvesant died in 1672, but was later buried at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery in New York City. September 11th, 2001, notes the sad and terrible day in our history when New York's beautiful Twin Towers were destroyed by bad and terrible people. St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, right around the corner from the disaster, was not harmed. Peter Stuyvesant and many other notable American patriots remain at peace there. They had come to Demarest Landing. The Dutch families who had come to New York were mostly farmers. They worked very hard. They soon learned that there were rich lands across the Hudson River from New York. These lands were located near another river called the Hackensack River. In 1693, these new settlers brought from farmlands and moved their families to yet another new home. They had come to Demarest Island in the shores of the Hackensack River. Farmers value land near rivers because crops grow well and then can be sold and transported by boat to nearby big cities. Farmers in Demarest Landing raised wheat, oats, rye and corn, apples and vegetables to sell in New York. They also raised pigs, sheep, chickens, and cows. In 1713, a young farmer by the name of Johannes Ackerman built a mill on the shore of the Hackensack River at Demarest Landing. He and his wife lived in the small house near what is today Elizabeth Court in River Edge. The house was located not far from the present United States Post Office building, whose name was recently changed from North Hackensack to Newbridge Landing, and came from the New Jersey Transit Station, whose name has also been changed to historic Newbridge Landing at River Edge. Johannes Ackerman's mill near Coles Brook emptied into the Hackensack River not far from his home. He made flour from the wheat, rye, oats, and corn that were grown in the neighborhood. He worked very hard and became prosperous. River Edge, New Jersey, Newbridge. A bridge was built across the Hackensack River in 1744, joining lands that today we know as River Edge and New Milford. Newbridge became the popular name of the new neighborhood. Because Newbridge was the nearest crossing to Newark Bay, the area near this bridge was busy and prosperous. 50-ton boats were able to dock on either shore of the river in the new bridge, at the new bridge. Soon there was a tavern, a general store, a yard goods store, a blacksmith shop, and bakery. The bridge and the dock near it made it easy for farmers to sell their crops to people in New York City. In return, the boats brought sugar, salt, cloth, tea, farming equipment, household goods, and many other useful things that were sold at the general store. Newbridge had become very important to the lives of the people. It is interesting to watch the water in the river. Grandfather explained that when the tides are high, the waters from the Newark Bay, and the Atlantic Ocean make the river flow north. When the tides are low, the river waters flow south. This happens 6 times a day. These changes in the tides make it possible for the Ackerman Grist Mill's water wheel to work efficiently. It was operated by the water powers generated by the tides. Grandfather, Kristen, and Jake stood on the shore of the Hackensack River. They stood on the bridge and looked across the river to River Park in Teaneck, where long ago Native American families lived. Relations with these neighbors were sometimes peaceful and sometimes not. The water that flowed under the bridge was a silent reminder of times when Native Americans and Dutch farmers lived as neighbors on upper shores of the Hackensack River. Today, this spot on the Hackensack is quiet and silent. There is no evidence of the struggles and hardships that took place in the vicinity during the years of the Revolutionary War. Kristen threw a pebble in the river. She watched the pretty circles it made in the water. Jake ran after a goose. Jake wanted to play. The goose loudly scolded Jake as it flew away. His loud complaints and Kristen and grandfather's laughs were the only sounds heard that July afternoon. In the winter of 1776, the little bridge at Newbridge Landing made it possible for General Greene's soldiers to return safely from Fort Lee and General Howe's advancing redcoats. The land around Newbridge has been a background, a fort, a military headquarters for George Washington, and an intelligence gathering post. The little span crossing the Hackensack River became known as the bridge that saved a nation. In 1745, another Dutch couple, Jan and Annette née Ackerman Zabriskie, built a sturdy stone house on the Hackensack River where Newbridge joined Demorest Landing and New Milford. In 1752, they enlarged their home. It had 12 rooms and 7 fireplaces. The Ackerman-Zabriskie house was a large, comfortable Dutch home. The land around the river and bridge had become the homes of busy, hard-working families of Dutch ancestry. By what other names do children know Sinterklaas? Every year in December, Sinterklaas comes to Newbridge Landing to visit good little boys and girls. The Dutch settlers brought many customs from Holland. One of the most special is the arrival of Sinterklaas and his gifts on the morning of the December 6th to children who have been very good all year. At Steuben House, this Dutch holiday is celebrated with music and singing. Sinterklaas, jolly and red-cheeked, greets everyone. All share ginger cookies and hot cider treats. Can you guess who Sinterklaas is? Another Dutch holiday centered around Pinkster Sunday. This was a Christian religious celebration that took place on Pentecost Sunday, a week after Easter, when Christians celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. This celebration coincides with the coming of spring, the planting season, the birth of nature. It was a joyous celebration, a rejoicing at the end of a cold winter, short days, and long nights. Everyone looked forward to enjoying the outdoor flowers, planting, and working in the warm sun. There would be new calves and lambs and swimming in the river. Don't you look forward to the arrival of spring each year? Dutch children did too. They danced around a maypole to show how happy they were that spring had finally come. Have you ever seen a Dutch door? It is a door that is made in two parts. The upper and lower halves are separated in the center. Dutch mothers and fathers locked the bottom half of the doors and opened the top half. This allowed fresh air into the house and permitted the small children to stay safely inside. Dutch doors also kept the cows outside the house. The French and Indian Wars took place between 1756 and 1763. In Europe, the struggle was known as the 7 Years' War. It was a power struggle between France and England for supremacy on the seas and dominance in world trade. In America, the French, the English, Dutch, and Iroquois Confederacy of North American Indians struggled for dominance of power in the northeastern part of the United States. The French influence was concentrated in Canada in the north and Louisiana in the south. French missionaries and traders had explored the Great Lakes region. The English had dominance on the eastern coast. When the English learned that the French had plans to extend their holdings from the rich Ohio Valley, they decided on war to settle these disputes. The Iroquois Confederacy of the western part of New York State and ties to the French, but the taking of their lands in the Ohio region had caused them deep concern. They joined the French and English conflict. The English prevailed. In 1756, the governor of Virginia took matters into his own hands. He ordered the young Colonel George Washington to the Ohio Territory to establish the English claim. Colonel Washington built a stronghold that he called Fort Necessity. Unfortunately, the French easily destroyed it. Colonel Washington surrendered to prevent further loss of life. But wars have many consequences, and its effects were felt even in Newbridge Landing, far, far away from the scenes of battles. This is what happened. In Europe, England had been at war for a long time and needed money to pay for the expenses of war. King George III thought that a good way of raising money was taxing the colonists of the New World for some necessities and treats that they liked from England. One of their favorite items to import was tea, so the king placed heavy taxes on the tea that came from England. The people of Massachusetts objected to the taxes because no one from the colonies had been represented them in English Parliament where the tax laws were passed. Taxation without representation is tyranny, they said, and refused to pay the tea taxes. On December 16th, 1773, the ships belonging to the Dutch East India Trading Company tried to deliver tea to the Boston merchants. Patriots, men who opposed the taxation, boarded the ships at anchor in Boston Harbor and threw the cargo of tea from England overboard. This act of defiance was called the Boston Tea Party and was one of the many events that finally led to the Declaration of Independence in 1776. 1776. Newbridge became important at this time because it served as a shipping point for iron that was brought from the Ramapo Mountains by ox cart to the river. This iron was needed for military purposes. Newbridge became the center of even more trading. The Hackensack River became a water highway not only for shipping farm products, but now it served the war effort by shipping the iron needed for tools of war. A symbol of our nation's fight for liberty and freedom. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was approved by Congress in Philadelphia. This document begins with the famous words, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one nation to break the bonds that unite them to another, it is one of the most important and beautifully written documents of freedom in the world." Over 200 years ago, our forefathers declared liberty. John Hancock, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and 53 other men who bravely signed this document were telling King George III of England that they no longer wanted him to be their king. They wanted to be free to govern themselves. They knew that by signing this letter, there would be a war. If you look at the Declaration of Independence closely, you will see that one courageous man, John Hancock, wrote his name in very large letters so that King George could read his name more easily. In November 1776, we almost lost the war for independence. Here is what happened. Fort Lee is a town about 7 miles east of River Edge, overlooking the Hudson River. The name Fort Lee tells you that there were many soldiers stationed there to protect the ships as they sailed along the Hudson River. The Continental Army officer in charge of defending the garrison at Fort Lee was Major General Nathaniel Greene. General Greene came from Vermont. He and his men were known for their bravery. They were called the Green Mountain Boys because they came from a state whose very name tells us that it is known for its mountains and beautiful green valleys. Vermont means Green Mountain in French. General George Washington was in Hackensack to review the fortifications and defense plans of the area with Major General Greene. Our brave men fought to create a nation where everyone, regardless of race, color, or creed, is equal and has the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They retreated to Newbridge and crossed the little bridge there to safety. When General George Washington learned that the British soldiers, the British men, the Redcoats, 6,000 of them, had crossed the Hudson River in boats and were going to attack Fort Lee, he knew that he could not win the battle. The British soldiers were well equipped and trained. One of the king's finest officers, General William Howe, was in charge of the attack. He was the commander-in-chief of the British forces during the American Revolution. Nathanael Greene and George Washington knew that they had to move the Continental Army away from Fort Lee very quickly. When soldiers find it necessary to back away from a battle, it is called a retreat. This is what the Continental Army did, led by General Greene at Fort Lee. They retreated to New Bridge and crossed the little bridge there to safety. The Continental Army had been saved to battle the British on another day. That is why to this day, New Bridge has gone down in history as the bridge that saved a nation. Did you know that 283 battles and skirmishes of the American Revolution took place in New Jersey? More battles of the War for Independence were fought in New Jersey than in any other of the 13 colonies. These are the times that try men's souls. It was on New Bridge that Thomas Paine, a famous reporter of the Revolutionary War, said the famous words, "These are the times that try men's souls." These lines have gone down in history to remind us that all wars are sad and difficult. The beginning paragraphs of Thomas Paine's essay are so beautiful and express so clearly and simply why our forefathers valued liberty so much that part of it is printed here for you to read. General Washington thought that Thomas Paine's words were so important that he ordered the American crisis read to his discouraged troops at Valley Forge. These words are as stirring and easy to understand today as they were when Thomas Paine wrote them on December 23rd, 1776. Notice that Thomas Paine wrote about the bridge over the Hackensack. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from their service to their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love, the thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too light. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Our first object was to secure the bridge over the Hackensack, which laid up the river between the enemy and us, without 6 miles from us, and 3 from them. General Washington arrived in about 3/4 of an hour and marched at the head of the troops towards the bridge, which place I expected we should have a brush for. However, they did not choose to dispute it with us, and the greatest part of our troops went over the bridge, the rest over the ferry, and except some which passed at a mill on a small creek, between the bridge and the ferry and made their way through some marshy grounds up the town of Hackensack, and then they passed the river. From the American Crisis by Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776. Don't you agree that these words are as inspiring today as they were in 1776? And did you notice how carefully Thomas Paine described the area around Newbridge Landing Park? The Zabriskie family and some others who were living at Newbridge did not agree with the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to remain loyal to King George III of England. They did not want to take part in the Revolutionary War on the side of George Washington, the Patriots, and the Continental Army. Because they remained loyal to the king, they were called Loyalists or Tories. The Zabriskie family of Newbridge, living in the Ackerman-Zabriskie house, were Tories. They left Newbridge and went to New York City. Their home in Newbridge was abandoned. General George Washington made the Ackerman-Zabriskie house his headquarters for a while during the Revolutionary War. Did you know that George Washington and his Continental Army were right here at Newbridge in River Edge? Did you know that skirmishes, small battles between Loyalists and Patriots, took place on streets and places that are familiar to us today in River Edge? Remember, some people living in Newbridge were for independence, and others were loyal to King George. Have you ever been to Van Saun Park in River Edge? There is a famous spot there called Washington Spring, where one day a thirsty George Washington got off his horse and stopped to have a drink of cool, fresh water. George Washington was helped in training the Continental Army to be soldiers by Major General Baron Friedrich von Steuben, who had come from Prussia in Europe. He trained and taught the boys and men of the Continental Army how to be soldiers. Baron von Steuben helped the Patriots win the war against England. Baron von Steuben trained the inexperienced Continental Army very well. It took time and patience, but under his teachings, they learned to become excellent soldiers. Because of the outstanding work that Baron von Steuben had done in training our soldiers so well, after the war was over and we became the United States, the state of New Jersey gave the Ackerman-Zabriskie house to Baron von Steuben in gratitude for all that he had done to help us. Baron von Steuben lived in this famous house at Newbridge for a short time. That is why today we know it, not as the Ackerman-Zabriskie house, but as the Steuben house. From Newbridge, George Washington led the Continental Army to Morristown and across the Delaware River to Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. They spent the winter of 1776-1777 in Valley Forge. It was very cold, and the men suffered greatly. Then they crossed the Delaware River to Trenton, where they won an important battle The Revolutionary War ended at the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia on October 19, 1781, when the British forces, commanded by Major General Charles Cornwallis, surrendered. We were now a new nation. We had become the United States of America. Grandfather, Kristen, and Jake, snuggled comfortably in Kristen's arms, entered Steuben House. They imagined how difficult it must have been for the Zabriskie family to leave Newbridge and their comfortable home and move to New York City. They saw a table set for dinner with pretty dishes, a baby's cradle, a cozy rope bed with warm quilts, and a big fireplace with cooking utensils. There were children's toys. There was a big casse, a cabinet that was filled with neatly folded quilts and blankets. The house was filled with fresh flowers and herbs that smelled of apple pies and ginger cookies. A number of years after the war was over, in 1788, Jan Zabriskie, named after his father, the Loyalist who had fled Newbridge at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, bought the house back from Baron von Steuben. In 1815, he sold it to his cousin, Andrew Zabriskie, who established the first brickyard in this part of the country. The Industrial Revolution was beginning, and Andrew Zabriskie's bricks were in much demand. Today, there are many people who are working to preserve the history of Newbridge Landing Park, the Steuben House, the New Bridge, and other interesting places in the park for future generations of Americans to enjoy. It is hoped that you will join the many who want to preserve this unique chapter of our history. When they arrived home, Grandfather showed Kristen the seal of River Edge. Enclosed in a circle of aquamarine signifying that River Edge is on the shores of the Hackensack River and bound by a rope border to remind us of the ships that tied up at Newbridge are the symbols of River Edge: the anchor, the musket, and the plow. The anchor recalls the defendants of River Edge in days gone by to shipping on the Hackensack River. The musket prompts us to remember the significant role that Newbridge played during the Revolutionary War. The plow is a reminder that agriculture and farming were important in the economy of Newbridge and River Edge into the middle of the 20th century. The 1693 commemorates the year that is regarded as the founding of Demorest Landing, which later became River Edge. Kristen's eyes danced. "Grandfather," she said, "thank you for telling me such an interesting story. Visiting Newbridge Landing and Steuben House on the 4th of July with you and Jake has been a wonderful birthday present." Grandfather kissed Kristen, winked at Jake, and shook his paw. Then it was time for a backyard picnic and Kristen's birthday party. Later that evening, they sat on lawn chairs at Cherry Hill School and watched the beautiful fireworks display. It had been truly a glorious 4th of July.